My phone has a storm warning on it, and I guess I've picked the only reprieve of the day. So, on film, this might look like any other normal Vancouver day, but it's a special one. It's one with a storm warning on it. Every so often, you'll probably hear the more forceful rustling of tree branches, leaves, and other natural organic matter. I'm still deciding whether this surface is fit for dancing at all. I mean, it's fit for very slow dancing. Ah, that's what happened. I thought I had leaned it all the way back. There we go, I have more space now. So, this is the last official day of 2020 somewhere around the world. I always celebrate the 48-hour joint because somewhere in the world we'll call it American Samoa or Australia. They're one day ahead of us. So today is the last day of 2020. As I agreed with Mel Robbins a couple vlogs ago, be careful in thinking that the change of digits on the clock is going to magically erase the current conditions and manifest something new. Mel is the inventor of the 5-second rule, where through a combination of neurology, neuroscience, and other scientific research, she discovered that counting backwards from 5 to 1 helps you motivate yourself to do whatever it is that you're procrastinating on. So for example, in the morning, as soon as she wakes up, she'll count down from 5 to 1 and then somehow have the motivation to lift her lord ass off the bed and start the day. Silly me, I invented 1, 2, 3 good. If I had just been smart enough to inverse it, I guess science would have been on my side. But unfortunately, we've all had to contend with a wild 2020, and who knows what's up for store in 2021. In channeling Gary Vee, I'm going to repeat myself again and again and again, because that's actually how some people learn. Yes, in alternate terms, it might be called ruminating, and ruminating has a bad rap. But for me, I think Gary Vee and I think alike, which is sometimes the same concept. You just have to hear it many different ways at many different times. And the idea might finally sink in for you one of those instances, or never. But I think repetition for me is how I analyze. It's one of my ways. So I'll repeat in different terms, but the same concept, that part of why I've been okay-ish in 2020, despite having some of my favorite adventure activities ripped from my grasp. I'll credit Steve Jobs. Steve and I came to this idea independently, but seemingly people need a celebrity to endorse in order for any idea to be taken seriously. Since 2013, I've been playing a game with myself. Steve Jobs calls it the "what would you do if today were your last day on Earth and you knew it?" I modified that idea for a longer time frame that allows you to achieve what you want, because realistically speaking, most of what you want needs a little bit more of a timeline than just today. But the timeline is a lot shorter than multi-years or long-term, like maybe some people think. So I've settled on 3 to 6 months, because after what you would call the test case scenarios, 2013 all the way to at least deep into the first quarter of 2020, that's largely worked for me. Everything that I'd consider self-actualization, I accomplished within 3 to 6 months. In some ways you can argue I'm easy, because I've structured all of my achievements and my self-actualization to be things that are largely my own projects. Why so? My own projects can actually still involve people like my family, my mom and bro, but they involve people in a way that's a lot less interwound and, dare I say, toxically codependent. "12-year-old me, although young, recognized that procreating other humans is a Ponzi scheme. Did I have the terminology to describe it back then? I have the terminology to describe it now. Yes, maybe you can blame genes and evolution, but I'll challenge any potential parents to think beyond that, because I think you owe it to both yourself, but more importantly, whatever children you think you might want to breed into this world. Does consent matter at all? We seem to have created a society where consent does matter. Now, that's a really recent development, but I think it's a positive one, that improves life satisfaction, life happiness for all the people that are here. But the problem is, I think people's concept of consent is too narrow. So I'll take the example of rape. I'm only considering the consent angle. Part of why rape we consider morally bad, and I consider morally bad, is because it violates the concept of consent. The person being raped never consented to that. So then, I'm going to expand the idea of consent, but to those yet to be born. I never consented to this life of suffering. And here's how we know that suffering is the foundational, underlying, objective truth, if there ever were to be one. I choreographed next week's dance already to a song called Monster by Justin Bieber and Shawn Mendes. What I have a problem with is people who try to shame either Justin or Shawn when they are vulnerable enough to share some of the suffering that they go through. Luckily for them, they have art as a medium. So the song Monster is a good artistic way to express some of the suffering that they go through, even as some of the top entertainers in the world, and even as some role model of success that people would expect have no problems, no suffering. Why it's relevant is because that's a big, fat lie. And the more we shame rich people when they complain, the more we perpetuate that lie. And the more we actually perpetuate some sort of illusion that this world is worthwhile and a gift. I'll reframe it. You have kids against their consent, or at least you've never asked them. So if that's the case, where does that leave us? My answer is nobody has children. I think that's the only way that it makes sense. For anybody who would accuse me of eugenics, I am all-inclusive eugenics. Basically, nobody. Amazon? Yeah. Yeah, cool, thanks. Yeah. So, the point being, anybody in this world should voice their frustrations, anger, suffering, whether from the poor person on Skid Row in LA to Jeff Bezos. Everyone has a right to do it. And I know that this year there's been a massive push against celebrities who have complained about the pandemic while in their palatial mansions. I think that celebrities, adventure travelers, anybody has every right to voice their frustrations, anger about the world and how it is. If anything, I think it's actually a responsibility for people who've self-actualized, like me, to actually voice frustrations out, because that will pop the illusion that there's some sort of special life that anybody can be born into that's devoid of suffering, because that is simply an illusion. Okay, now, if you know that that's an illusion, then I'll challenge all parents, any potential parents, to think about this. I'm a person, me, self-actualized, born into this world, who would have chosen otherwise, to stay in the void, if possible. That means I regret being born, but nobody ever asked me my opinion. So then people would question, well, how can you? You're self-actualized, you're an adventure explorer who's experienced the greatest highs in 101 UN countries. I've basically materialized every single experience that I ever could have dreamed of, and more and more and more. So how can I, being in that fortuitous position, possibly, blasphemously proclaim that I would have rather never been born? Well, I can and I will, because in all of the research that I've done, I think it's as objective as truth can be that life is suffering, fundamentally. Why? Because regardless of how many wild animals I interact with, there's a double-edged sword. Quite literally, a sword of death dangling over all of us. When bush camping in Africa, one of my and many travelers' top experiences is to experience the wild of the wild in front of your very eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. But the double-edged sword of it is that the wildest of the wild is really rife with suffering. So as wild hyenas tore apart an antelope, tug-of-warring its sinews right in front of me, so close that one almost smacked me in the face, I wonder what all this is for. One of our top experiences, experiencing the wild in the wild, is actually a very suffering experience for those wild animals who are acting on a stage in front of me, but really living out their lives in front of me. That concept of death is actually important because it infects everything we do, according to the creator of terror management theory, or co-creator, Sheldon Solomon. I greatly agree with him, and I think it answers one of the questions that I've had about myself. In Dr. Solomon's studies, and in studies replicated in different times and spaces across the world, he discovered the following disturbing trends and patterns. When people are reminded of death, even subconsciously, even briefly, they're more likely to hate others, dig into their own pre-existing beliefs, even with lack of evidence. And the list goes on and on. Almost every difficult thing that happens on this earth can actually be traced back to our relationship with death that's largely suppressed. So, what does this mean? Even if you know this, even if I know this, am I going to go on a one-person quest to try to unwind this complex machinery that creates suffering? More importantly, I'd never want to look someone like me in the eye and have to explain to them why I decided that my own insecurity was justification enough to bring them into the world, to birth them, to create them, to breed them. Actually, all of the compassion we need to know that we should forward onto our fellow humans, we already do for animals. When they're nearing end of life and suffering, we euthanize them. We sterilize them to avoid them proliferating populations that'll have poor quality of life. So if we've thought this way, if we understand this, if that's the compassionate way to act for animals, why is it any different for humans? In any case, I'm riffing here about antinatalism again. Antinatalism, I always bring it up as if people should know it, but I should explain. Antinatalism is the philosophy that breeding, procreating humans is bad. Always bad. By anybody. Not just specific groups of people. Because there are a number of arguments against it. Today, I've highlighted the consent problem and the suffering problem, but some of the luminary philosophers in this space are David Benatar from South Africa, and in olden days, Schopenhauer. In the antinatalism thread on Reddit, a couple of theist antinatalists, so religious antinatalists, actually interpret the Bible to be against procreation too. So anyone who's religious can go have a debate about that. In any case, I should probably dance, but the rain has started it again in earnest. We have a pitter-patter floor. How do we do this? Yes, I'm ending 2020 on a ranty note, but this is my vlog. Nobody's forcing you to watch. If you want to watch something else, go ahead. I'm also quite libertarian in the sense that I'm never going to be protesting signs to take away your procreative rights. Do the fuck what you want. You're the one who has to deal with a potential me, a potential child who's gonna fuck you because you brought them into this world. And actually that's the note that I should end on. Okay? I've actually discussed this with my mom. And despite the fact that it's probably difficult for any parent to admit, she's admitted to me that she knows why I think the way I think. And going back, she would have just stayed a single lady without a husband or kids if she had had the foresight to think things through. That's probably why she actually is supportive of me and my lifestyle. And in some ways, I should be at least at peace for that. Because the people around me, the people who are most important to me, my mom and bro, are both anti-natalists in their own ways. Yes, my mom had some kids before she came to this conclusion, but now she's on board with me. My sibling also. I know from reading the antinatalism boards on Reddit that there are people who are surrounded by families who are completely back at crazy compared to them with regards to this, and it's a deal breaker for a lot of people. That adds to their suffering. So I'm already in probably the best position as an antinatalist because I'm living with fellow antinatalists. I really, really wanted to dance today. I will. I still have 5 minutes. This is still a dancing vlog, so can I dance while talking? Of course I can dance while talking. I'm gonna throw down some choreography, some light choreography first. In the rain. Okay, that one's a dangerous one to do in the rain. So I'm going to just it. Because I need some rough cuts to know. It's just a little bit of a sneak peek of my choreography, because this is still a dancing vlog. So I ended up going long on my philosophies, but I'm going to continue because this helps me. I think although it's difficult, there's a reason why, for example, the Armenians fight for the term genocide to be added to some historical events in their history. Sometimes you just have to express in words how you feel, regardless of how harsh it is. So, in many different ways, I've worded it, but I summarize it as I feel I've been raped into this life of suffering, and that concept I've expressed to my mom and dad in many, multiple different ways. Now, surprisingly, because I did it at least at first with some vulnerability and then with some anger, I've had some of the closure that helps me move forward from this, what I consider the worst of traumas. The fact that both my parents recognize and admit that they made a mistake in breeding me into this world of suffering, in raping me into this world of suffering, that's probably the one thing that I've needed for me to move on. And that's one thing where, if that's how you feel, I'd suggest you might want to, at the very least, express it to yourself in those terms. If you think this is something that you might be able to express to your parents, do so. Obviously, you can say it different ways, but I think it's important to recognize trauma and suffering where it comes and in all its forms. You're allowed your own experience, and whoever's trying to suppress that can go fuck right off, okay? Because they're allowed to express whatever traumas they have too. Their traumas are different. And I'm tired of people using some sort of relative scale as if only children starving in Africa are allowed to be sad about it. I've traveled to Africa, I've observed these children, and in some ways, I understand that their suffering is great and immense, but I'll never, ever downplay someone else's suffering because it's a different kind of suffering. You're allowed your suffering, I'm allowed my suffering, and however you want to express it, whether you're Bezos, Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, or you're the financially poorest woman in the world, you're allowed to express it because we're all living in a world of suffering. And the more that people who might outwardly look like they have no reason to express suffering do express it, the more we can move out of this illusion that life is a gift. I think the reframing would be life is an imposition at best, and at worst is a form of rape, raping into suffering. Something that I'm going to have to work on, okay? This concept is a difficult one to explain for people who are outside of it, but I'll continue doing it because I've had feedback from other antinatalists in the community that whatever I'm doing at least is helpful to them. So whether I convert any breeders or natalists to my side, I don't give a fuck about influence, power, or any of that. I don't give a fuck. That floats other boats, but it sinks mine. So I'm just more a communicator by nature. If anything, one thing I specialized in is communicating complex, technical topics in a way that might be still understandable. I had a business, I started a business, and I still technically have a business, technical writing. So I treat this as a communication exercise. I treat this as a skillful art, okay? Can I explain something that is out of the mainstream, completely outside the box that houses that box, and outside the box that houses that box, okay? Can I actually explain something that outside the box in a way where people might at least concede that I have some good points? The intriguing aspect of me verbally spitfiring like this is that despite how controversial this idea is to people on Redditors, I've had really mostly positive experiences debating this to most people. When I explain what antinatalism is, you'd be surprised how many people agree at least with some of the arguments. Most of them are people in my family, as I've explained. Mom and bro, the most important people to me, but even extended family, even friends. I've noticed that they actually have more of a relief that someone would be so open with ideas that are this controversial. And that's me. I'm someone who's open with my ideas because that's the base of me. I'll do it regardless of the consequences because I think that's living a true, authentic life, and that's pretty much one of several things that is worthwhile in this life. And that's the thing, though, that despite having my antinatalist philosophy, I also have another equally forceful dedication to actualizing and self-actualizing. So, am I going to keep going long on this one? Because this is a last of 2020? Yeah, I'll keep going to 38, which is a lucky superstitious number. But I'll do it anyways because I'm weird that way. Since I was forced to be here, self-actualizing is the only option because otherwise I'd be gone. Okay? So it's either I'm gone or I stay and I self-actualize. If I stay and I'm miserable, that option, which is what a lot of people are in, to me holds no value whatsoever. None. Okay? So that's why it's if I stay, I'm self-actualizing. And self-actualizing also means working within the constraints of the real world. Okay? So obviously there are a ton of things that you might want to do that are self-actualizing, but if they impede on other people's ability to self-actualize, that's something that you might have to come to terms with that person, which is why I am a proponent of negotiations in good faith. Okay? For me, most of what I want is something that if I interface with people, they'll provide as long as I provide something in return. That's, I guess you could call marketplace capitalism in a way, but obviously there are some basic fundamental human rights that I think are outside of the capitalist structure. Okay? So that's where I'm a hybrid. I'm a left libertarian, I'm a socialist capitalist, in the sense that I believe there is a bare minimum safety net. And with that being said, I think I've seeded a number of different topics that I can delve into in 2021 when we're back again with the Breaking Bad live stream.